Game loaded.
Hi, and welcome to the edition of Lessons Learned with your host, Rafael Piñero. Now, I have ranted and raved against the sketchy practices of the AAA industry for quite some time on this channel. And I'm not the only one, of course. But often the answer I get is, well, they do these things because they're out to make money. Therefore, they have to do them. And then you ask yourself, and the person who's telling you this, why that is. And they say, well, because the cost of making games has increased, which is true. It's also a very simplistic answer. And anybody who's been listening to me for some time knows that I don't like simplistic answers. I like simple answers, but not simplistic ones. And if you don't know the difference, then you're in the wrong channel. So let's get on with it, shall we? Let's break it down. In the beginning, of course, video games were probably made by one person, the so-called garage coder, maybe with a couple of friends, on an Apple II, Commodore 64s, C Spectrum, BBC Micro, early IBM PC, you name it. And if they made a good game that they could fit in, say, on a cartridge for an Atari 2600 with between 4 to 8K, that's kilobytes, of RAM, and it was fun enough for the kiddies to play, then they got themselves a hit. But as time went by, of course, 2-bit became 4, 4 became 8, 8 became 16, and therefore games became more and more complex along the way, became bigger, better graphics, faster gameplay, more complex controls. And that meant that your developing teams grew accordingly. More people, more time, equals more money. The office space is bigger, you have to spend more coffee, you actually have to put a cafeteria, And especially if you're developing games in places like Tokyo or San Francisco or LA or, other very expensive cities like Seattle, then yeah, it's gonna cost you a pretty penny to make, almost anything. But still, the prices were not that high. Now, one of the things that people don't realize that was a huge change in video games was the introduction of the CD. That's a compact disc. Compact disc not only exponentially expanded the storage space in media and dropped the cost of, producing the games, because the CDs are pretty cheap even today, or their equivalents, DVDs and Blu-rays, but it also meant that you had dedicated channels for video and audio. All of a sudden, you could have full motion video. You could have little movies, not just fast cutscenes between levels, but instead you could have, story delivered by actors sitting in front of a green screen. Of course, those cutscenes meant that you have to have dedicated space to record them, and the camera, and you have to bring in the actors, and you have to have a script writer, stuff that wasn't there before, stuff that you didn't think about when you actually went developing a game, because it wasn't about coding. That was about, shooting a film. And while FMVs didn't last for long, the complexity of cutscenes, whether made in-engine or you hired someone else to make them for you, continued to grow. But what did stay behind was voice acting. Most of the actors came in, play a mad general or an alien of some sort, and stay to voice the mad general or the alien. And that meant, again, more voice actors, longer lines, more of everything meant more cost. And then, of course, when video games went on full-on 3D, and I don't mean, slapping some glasses at somebody so they can see, great graphics, but rather actually full motion 3D spaces as well as character models, the complexity of the interaction between the models and the environment and each other meant that you had to introduce new ways of making them. The old 2D animation tricks just wouldn't cut it. Now, of course, video games have been trying to do 3D for a very long time, vector graphics and the like, but it really was in the late 1990s when both consoles and PC could really model 3D graphics, specifically characters. But if you look back at your old Virtuons, your Final Fantasy VIIs, and your Virtual Fighters, and even the Tekkens, they look kind of janky. They look a little more like puppets than real people. So how do you fix that? Well, you take another trick from Hollywood and introduce full motion capture. That required an actual studio, not just an office in the back. And that meant adding another level actors, or having your voice actors also do the full motion capture, including nowadays voices as well, while they act. And that requires special mocap suits and special cameras and special sets, and of course, special hardware and software, none of which is part of actually coding the game. And of course, the 3D objects require new modeling of shadows, particle effects, with water, rain, and dust, collision effects, etc. The best way to do it was to use specifically made engines that could model those interactions. I said engines, as in multiple engines. And remember those cinematics, those cutscenes, also required an increasing amount of codecs for the sound and video, whether or not they were made in engine. That meant paying third parties to either make the cinematics for you, like I said before, or lend you or sell you the engines and codecs in order for you to compress all that information and put it in the game and to make your cinematics. Again, video games became more complex. But again, that's not the whole story. Because if you look at this page in Wikipedia, which I linked to it below, yeah, I know, it's Wikipedia, but it does have, if it's true, and I do believe it has some kernel of truth, it shows that that's not the only area in which video games budgets have ballooned. Because you can see that in some examples, the budgets for advertisement of these games is as high or higher than the actual cost of producing the game. Take, for example, if your game, say your Star Wars The Old Republic, which is an MMO, costs about $100 million, and you decide to match that dollar for dollar in advertising dollars, that meant that you spent another $100 million, which means, of course, that your total budget now is $200 million, double what you started with. If you go to an advert to production ratio of 2-to-1, money-wise, that means you spend $200 million in advertising for the $100 million for production. Means, of course, that your total cost is now $300 million. And why is advertising so expensive? Well, it's expensive because before it was just print and TV, which had its costs, but they were manageable. But now you have to advertise in a myriad of websites, on social media. You have to do half a dozen or more trailers for YouTube. And of course, again, just like the cutscenes, you have to decide whether you hand it over to an outside agency or you make them in-house. Either way, they're expensive. You have to make these gigantic presentations in an ever-growing number of expos and conventions. Look at E3. It looks, every time they show, in the big arena, any of these performances, it's equivalent of a major concert. And it's a week-long event to the point that some companies simply bow out and go like, yeah, we're not going to do it. Nintendo being one of them. In fact, E3 got canceled for a couple of years and then came back bigger, badder, and more expensive than ever. And you don't simply advertise up to the point where the game comes out. You have to keep on advertising in order to keep selling the game. Otherwise, your sales are going to drop off pretty quickly because the next big game is going to simply sweep yours under the rug. And you start advertising, hence the hype train, much earlier, up to a year to a year and a half. That's months on ends of leaks and Twitter comments and trailers and interviews and behind the scene trailers. And again, everything costs more and more. And then, of course, finally, you have what I like to call the online option. Again, your DLCs, your microtransactions, your multiplayer game options, such as, horde modes and multiplayer arena, multiplayer co-op, etc. That means that not only you have to have the servers in order to support the game, but you have to continue to support the game upwards of a year. For example, I have this article that says that over 11 million users of Call of Duty are still playing the game in older platforms like the 360 and the PlayStation 3. That's 11 million people. You're not simply going to just drop them and say, well, hopefully they'll one day buy the new consoles or move up to a more powerful PC. No. It's 11 million people who, a significant percentage of them, say about 5%, will pay for microtransactions, will buy all pieces of DLC you throw at them, and will play, and have been playing for years, and will continue to buy your games as well. You hope they will make the transition, but you're simply going to drop them. That's too much money. Well, of course, that means that you have to support them alongside the new consoles and PC users, and each one has its own costs and limitations, and on and on and on and on. And you have to do it for, a year or more. Well, for years, because, the way that Activision sells Call of Duty is a new game every year. And you're hoping that they make the jump to the new game as soon as possible. And that tends to drain the coffers and sort of chip away at any profits you made. Even if you made billions of dollars, you still have to, factor in that online maintenance, if you will. But what makes all this so complicated is the way the numbers are presented. We get a lot of fudging of the numbers, a lot of accounting tricks. So getting to the root of how much money is being really made and the actual health of both individual companies and the industry as a whole is very difficult, making answer the question of why they have to do what they have to do or feel they have to do that much more complex. But, we've spent over 10 minutes on this one video. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave the further analysis of profit margins, net versus gross, and other things for my next video. As always, if you like this or any of my videos on my channel, please comment and subscribe, and I'll see you when I see you. Good night.